Yeah, so please, send a message if I'm going too fast. So because I have a tendency to talk quite fast when I'm excited. So, feel free to slow me down. What's also going to be challenging is that I'm going to share my screen with my slides, but so that which means I cannot see the Zoom interface anymore.
I can keep track of the chat if you'd like.
Yeah, if you could do that, that would be great. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen now. Niels, you have to enable the screen sharing. Oh, I'm the host now. Can I? All right, thank you. So let's see, where am I going here? Here. No, I have to do the screen. I think the best way to do this. Okay, so share. So can everybody see my my slides or my screen actually? Okay, so thank you all for attending. Today I'm gonna talk to you about sort of a way of actually trying to do a better design process. And the idea, so it's called Designing Forward, and it's about leveraging lean UX to break through challenges of the design process. Every time I sort of go into a design process, making a game, or actually anything that has to do with design, it's always quite a difficult process in the beginning. It's always, I mean, I don't know if you recognize this, but it's always sort of you have this sort of period where you need to get to know each other and get used to each other. And especially when time is short, and when you have where the deadlines are quite near, and especially if you are sort of in the same sort of the roles are not defined yet, it becomes quite stressful, challenging, maybe even combative, where basically the one with the loudest voice, the one with who is the most, let's say, intimidating, sort of dominates the whole discussion, dominates the process, and in the end, you end up with shattered egos, disappointment, but a product that sometimes is okay and meets the requirements, but usually there's always some disappointment or, let's say, some sadness involved. And in the past, I have been sort of on both sides of the equation, and if people know me as being quite opinionated and and sometimes also stubborn, and so I have also in the past, I guess unintentionally insulted people, and that makes it, but yeah, and that's sort of sad because it doesn't have to be like that. Also, and I don't know if you recognize this as well, is that when you sort of trying to come up with the ideas and you're talking about stuff, it's so difficult to really understand what people are saying. And if you're sort of trying to react on it, people tend to be defensive about this idea or that they have, or just stay silent and listen, and then hopefully this sort of resolves itself. But it's a very sort of, you're talking to one another, but you're unable to really listen to one another. And what you have at the end is like a 3 hours later, you're still nowhere. So I'm Karel Minnenaar. I'm a game designer with, let's say, 12 plus years of design experience. In the past, I have designed and created art installations. I've made numerous applied games for schools, for architecture, museums, and other cultural institutions. I have also made, you can't really see it probably because of the UI. I don't know. Is actually the Zoom UI visible, Niels?
I don't see your Zoom UI.
Oh, okay. So if I do this, I'm doing something now, you don't see it.
No.
Okay, cool. So I've done also for companies some change management processes, and currently I'm designing an indie entertainment game. I also am a lecturer, as Niels already explained, a lecturer at the HKU, but also at the University of Applied Science in Amsterdam. I'm also a researcher there, and occasionally I'm also a design consultant. At the moment, I'm designing a new, working on this game, Unexplored 2. And it's an indie roguelite RPG, which is now available on Epic in early access. And this Friday, a demo will be made available on Steam during its Next Fests event. So, well, we're already sort of developing it for, I don't know, 3-4 years now. And it will be, the 1.0 version will be done somewhere around next year, May. So if you're interested, please check it out. Before we really sort of, start off, and I'm guessing this is going to be challenging, but I'm curious about you guys. And so this is going to be a whole interesting experiment, but I want to know if what your design experience are so far. Is someone able to share something about their own experiences? Okay, okay, there's a lot of people. So, okay, this is going to be, okay, this is going to be sort of difficult because I have no clue how to sort of pronounce anyone's name. So please forgive me if I'm pronouncing it wrong, but let's just say Dongmin, can you share an experience? Thank you. Okay. We'll okay. And so Dongmin, can you sort of try to explain how the process has been so far? How do you are you working on this alone? Are you doing this together with other people? And if so, well, how have you organized yourself so far? Okay, so you're in a team with four people, and so do you recognize anything that I have, let's say, mentioned in my little introduction? So anything about the frustration of being in that process of, you're trying to sort of communicate some good ideas, but people are just not getting it, or are very critical, or and others can feel free to also share it on the chat if you want to. So I'm just very interested in seeing if you guys recognize the things that I've been talking about so far, and just to sort of give me a sense of where you guys are at. Okay, can you explain why it was hard to receive feedback? Interesting. So I'm okay. And why was that? Why wasn't it fun? Why did you think it was fun, and why afterwards it wasn't? Okay, so okay, I understand. Well, what sort of Dongmin is now explaining is that you make assumptions when you're designing, right? You think you have an idea, and then you think it's going to be good, but it's in the end, you basically in the beginning you don't know. And what's interesting about this is that actually that when you sort of try to fit it in context with the game, you begin to realize that if something is actually working at all. And this is actually something that you want to do quite fast in your process, to make sure that you're on the same page, you have a good understanding, and that you see that whatever it is that you're thinking about will work at all. So in a way, this is actually a good sort of experience that you had, something that actually it's something that I think not everybody is taking can sort of appreciate that or incorporate that into their process. So let's just move on, and let me explain what I'm trying to sort of get at. So one of the challenges of design, especially when you're in sort of big teams, I mean, talking with being in teams of 4, small teams, communication can go quite smoothly, or it's easier to solve. But when you're talking about big teams, 8, 9, 12, 30, 40, 100, communication can be quite frustrating, especially because everybody can have an opinion. And especially here in the Netherlands, we tend to be quite opinionated and quite critical, and share that criticism, and that can be quite confrontational, and also maybe even become personal. And there's if you don't so that's one part. The second part is then consensus, coming up, so being that so the point that everybody is on this sort of in agreement, means that you have to compromise, which means that some qualities in process or in product will suffer. So one of the things that you're already experiencing probably, and or will be experiencing in the future. And again, especially in large teams and also multidisciplinary teams, is that communication can be very frustrating. And you think about, you're talking about the same thing, but then afterwards you realize you're not talking about the same thing, or someone is actually saying something meaning something else. Things can get, as I said before, the way they can word it can be very become quite personal or insulting, which means that it creates all kinds of, let's say, tension in the process that is becomes a sort of a negative spiral where people feel unsafe. And if we're talking about the consensus, is that people are just then sort of in agreement because they want to be in agreement, which means that the quality of the product, the quality and the quality of the process can diminish, because so that people just, that you need to sort of go forward, especially when we're talking about deadlines and reaching those deadlines. Well, you have to make hard choices. You need to get things wrapped up and finished, and that means a compromise. And a lot of these problems can then could have been solved when you could actually have undertaken taken other let's say initiatives somewhere earlier in the process. So where does these let's say two problems come from? Well, in my opinion, it has to do with these are some causes that I think three main causes, and it's one is egos can be fragile or are fragile. Everyone lives on an island, and conflict equals pain, is pain. What I mean with egos are fragile is that you are you are basically developers / designers, which mean, and you are developing those skills, developing this mindset, and basically it's still quite, let's say, fragile, because you haven't still not a lot of experience. You're still at school, and later on you will get, have to get to jobs, and you have to still prove yourself, and which means that you are also self-conscious. You are also insecure about your own capabilities, about who you are, about what you want to do and what you want to achieve. And when you sort of get into the design, in the arena of design, and you're talking about creating something cool and being creative, you are exposing yourself to a certain extent. And depending on who you are, what kind of personality you have, you are sort of fully exposing yourself or limiting that exposure. But there's always a risk that egos will be, well, I would say, can get hurt. Feelings can get hurt. And that's why, and that's because we're sort of, everybody lives on an island. We are in a way isolated. And over time, when you mature, you get better at handling that and creating these let's say bridges to and become and understand how to sort of filter these things. But you're now in the process of trying to master that. And the thing is that your island is your personal space, and nobody has ever seen that, right? And nobody understands that correctly. And you think your world is that island, but there are many islands, of course. So it's all about the fact that you have to learn and understand, that there are other views on certain things that you see as truth for others are maybe are not. And you have to still learn to reconcile those differences and ways to sort of figure that out. And also, well, that people have a tendency to shy away from conflict, especially when you're trying to, work together. You want to make sure that there's harmony, and so that that you're more in agreement with one another, rather than, do a confrontation, and well, because people, you have to run the risk that people can get hurt. And yeah, so what I was thinking, or what I'm proposing, is a solution to where you actually sort of try to change these sort of, trying to sort of change this, and try to embrace the fact that you are all different and you're all living on those islands, but together you are stronger. Everybody has value, and that there is a way to listen to one another and trying to understand and know each other better. But that, well, the ways of, how people tend to do this, sometimes, doesn't work. And so to be, in my experience, what's always good is to follow the passion, follow the inspiration. So and not being afraid of, getting it wrong. And the last one is maybe the most important, is that you, instead of talking about it, you just show it, and then slash make it, and talk about that instead of just talking to one another. So with the following the passion is about, in that process of design, you get that when you're thinking about what you're going to make, you get ideas, right? You get inspired by the subject, by the game, by the prospect of making a game, and your initial ideas, where you get so riled up, are worth pursuing. And what usually happens in a, let's say, normal process, is that you do sort of a process of elimination, where you sort of, through discussion or whatever, come up with one design and choose this path. And which means that you have to kill the ideas of others, and immediately, and that's it. And what I will propose later on is a method that actually is can be much more time constrained, but it does embrace that inspiration, that sort of initial motivation and inspiration, that without actually wasting too much time. Basically, the time spent on discussing if it's a good idea or not will then be spent on actually making it, and then looking at it, and then see what kind of value is, and giving an expression of your inspiration, your passion. I think oops. Oh, right. I switched this around. Well, let's just do it like this. Being wrong is being right, means that you're also, because of your, because a project needs to be done in a certain amount of time, and also it feels like wasteful to do the wrong thing, to make mistakes. But because of design, because of design, you're making something that will exist in the future, and therefore the process is inherently unpredictable. You will make mistakes. It is impossible not to make any mistakes. Therefore, it's better to make mistakes early on, because then there are low stakes involved, and then you will realize then what you shouldn't be doing, basically what Dongmin actually sort of explained in his project. So don't be afraid. So I would say don't be afraid to make any mistakes. Just experiment, try, and the sooner the better. And because being wrong means that you know that it is wrong and that you have to change something. The effort that you spend on it is not / never wasted. But you have to make appropriate preparations so that you can actually afford to make mistakes. And again, I will explain a process that actually, can make that possible within a project. Oh. And finally, show, don't tell. Again, we can get bogged down in these discussions about a good idea, about certain concepts, and then we sort of sprawl out in this huge discussion about what can and cannot be done, and everyone who is on their thinking about their thing becomes quite critical about the other thing because they don't see it, and then you get sort of in this really weird deadlock where out of frustration you just choose one thing. But it doesn't have to be like that. Instead of talking about things, you can also say, well, you can approach it in a different way and say, well, this is our problem, this is our thing, we need to come up with stuff, and then say, well, if someone is very passionate about a certain idea, instead of talking about it, is actually following that emotion. It's like, okay, cool, you're inspired. Then instead of trying to explain what that thing is, because people just came up with it on the spot, you're saying, well, why don't you make something that explains that thing that you're feeling and being inspired about in a way that we can look at it, experience it in some way. So making a form of prototype, a very simple thing that can be experienced and that you can talk about instead of talking, sort of in abstract about it. So, and therefore, especially in those meetings, cutting enough instead of trying to discuss and again explain it, saying, okay, you feel strongly about this, then we'll give you some time to somehow make something that that can show you what you're seeing, and you can do that with everybody else. You time box it, and then people come back and they have some product that they will demonstrate and show, and then you discuss about the actual content, about how it will fit or not, because that makes a much more fruitful discussion. And again, I will give you some more tools to apply this. Well, which is actually now. So before I go into this process, are there any questions? Is it clear when I'm explaining? And is it relatable? What I'm do you recognize some things in my story about how you about your own design experiences? Let's see. So what is the bad things in the team when team structures are vertical? Can you sort of explain what you mean? Because I don't really get what you're trying to ask here. Right. So let's see if I can figure out what. So see. So I'm going to. Right. Okay. So you're asking how this process should work or could be, well, made doable when there's a boss involved, someone who actually gives orders, and where you actually sort of have no choice uh, uh, in doing something. Um, this of course changes things a bit, but still some things apply. Um, and it sort of kind of depends on how, let's say, dominating your boss is going to be. The thing is that of course within such a hierarchy, uh, the boss basically gives assignments based on, let's say, what he needs to get done in a certain way. So there is a lot of, let's say, processing, risk analysis already being done, and then he sort of delegates that work that needs to be done to the team. And but in the end, it boils down to the same thing, right? You need to sort of produce something, and the question, and it kind of depends on how, let's say, specific the assignment is. But in the end, the boss needs to get his problem solved, and in a way, he doesn't care about how you're going to solve it. It just needs to get done. And in this case, you really need to sort of figure out, okay, what is actually, sort of to look at what is he actually asking, right? And sometimes it's uh, sort of the assignment is, if you just sort of fulfill the assignment, then you will get things. But sometimes you also do fulfill this assignment, but you still get, let's say, criticism, negative feedback, or downright refusal, because he did what he uh, because he didn't make very clear what he needed at that point in time, and then sort of push that off to you because you haven't somehow listened to him. Again, there is this communication is frustration problem. And a way to try to sort of understand what actually, to get that to that understanding of what he actually needs is, instead of blindly following that sort of the directive, you could also, and if you sort of recognize that this could be that there's something more to it, then you can try you can make sort of this a small prototype, to a small thing that gives you that helps you talk about what it is that you need to make, and then what kind of quality level, what kind of quantity, and a test to see if what he is asking you meets, and what you sort of think you need to make meets that expectation. Instead of totally at the end say, well, surprise, I've done everything as you said, and then he says, this is not what I want. I would say a good boss it should be open for this. If not, then, well, you're sort of in a sad place, I would say. And then what they ask of you is not being very creative. Then what you're being asked to do is, well, literally to execute what's what someone actually wants to do. So you're basically only the hands. Does this sort of explain, explains, or is this an answer to your question? Maybe, yeah. Is this an answer to your question? Okay, cool. So, so the stuff that I've been talking about so far, are the problems, and I think where the solution could, where you can find the solutions, and there is this, let's say, process that you can see here on the slide, which is called Lean UX, that sort of tries to incorporate these things that I've been talking about. And it's actually it's actually a process meant for where they take out the principles of a design process and then has exported it for other non-design processes. So it's like a development, a production, which is sort of interesting that basically I'm sort of looping around back again, because what is so nice about this is that it is applicable for any process involving teams and projects. And the whole Lean UX thing was sort of well, I guess invented, thought of, whatever, to reduce waste in production processes. Especially when I'm talking about production, it's all about effectiveness and efficiency, and what the tendency of production is that the end user is sort of out of scope, out of it's not sort of taken into account, because you're just making products and that's the only thing that you care about. And but for their field, it's quite a radical view, is saying no, we incorporate the whole the consumer in or the end user in our process to create a better product, a product where you don't where you have less waste, is sort of always oriented outward, so always consumer oriented, and always thinking about, okay, what does the end user want? Well, and these principles are are sort of, I guess, what is the word I'm looking for here? Should be sort of second nature for for people in our field, or so you would say. Thinking about the end user, you are making games is, of course, you are very conscious about the fact there are players out there. But because of we're designing a game, developing a game is super complex, and if you're not careful, you sort of forget that they are there, and that they are only there when you have that game. And it's like, okay, I've made this game, and then, well, people say, yeah, it's shitty, it doesn't work, and you probably already have some experience or this notion that you want to actually give the players your game as soon as possible, right? To see if whatever it is that you have built, that you assumed that was good, is actually good and actually pleasurable. So this is what I'm going to say and we'll talk about now is probably not so as far from from how you think about these things. But what's interesting about this whole process is that they sort of cut down the whole process and the steps that you have to take in very, 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 very simple steps that can be sort of again applied to any task, anything that you want to achieve. So it's very scalable. So the Lean UX process consists of basic three steps: the think, the make, and the check. And this cycle sort of, and it's an iterative cycle that repeats itself, where you can sort of improve on a certain thing. And probably you're already sort of doing this. But what makes Lean UX interesting is, again, that the perspective, the way you look at things, is facing forward. So if you're talking about, you're always thinking about sort of how that thing that you're thinking about, you're trying to make an expression that that has something to do with the end experience, something to do with, let's say, part of the end product, instead of making a very small sub product that's somewhere deep inside the game, or deep inside, let's say, before the product or whatever. And the idea of this is that you already get a sense that you're sort of looking in the right direction. So in the think phase, it's basically about, okay, what is it then? So it's thinking about what the assignment is, or the goal that you want to achieve. So, for example, if you're you're sort of at the very start of your project, and you have to think about, okay, what are the ideas? What is the concept? What kind of restrictions are there? This is the think phase. And in the think phase, you are sort of figuring those things out. Okay, for who is it? Why is it important? What is actually the goal? And you're sort of thinking. In this case, this can be collaborative, but it can also be your own personal process. Figuring out, okay, what do I see? What do I find important? And how does that match with, let's say, the outside, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And where you can try to sort of come up with to a point where you can say, okay, I have this idea, and where I make this assumption that if I do this, it will be very interesting. And this is important. You're sort of being very aware that you're making assumptions. So you're connecting, it's like, okay, to achieve this goal, I think that if I do this, I will reach that. And that is the point, and that's usually sort of the point where you sort of go to the next step, which is the make phase. In the make phase, you're going to figure out how to sort of get that idea that you're having, that sort of inspiration that you have for that game or whatever. You're trying to make that into something that can be experienced. That is a reflection of that idea, and it's and it is something that can be experienced by other people. So it's something that, well, in our case, we're talking about games here, something that has to do with gameplay. It can be played, even if it's very simple, right? One interaction, one thing. That's actually more than enough. It's and that's for example, yeah. So and it kind of, and again, it kind of depends on where you are in the process, but it can be as small as making, okay, I have this idea for a button and how it should behave. You basically make you pull out a piece of paper and begin to draw it, and you're making sort of the different you draw out the different states, and you sort of to demonstrate the functionality, you can sort of show it to other people. It's like, look at this really weird animation that I have made. And that in itself is much more valuable than just talking about, yeah, it's sort of, if you press it, then it sort of depresses and then goes back, and then a blink gives light. If you describe it like that, it's less valuable. If you have made it and you've considered it and you think about it, and you can let people experience it when you click about it, it is much more closer to the actual experience, therefore more valuable. And then you have the check phase, which basically, and again, you sort of take that thing that you've made and bring it towards a end user. And it can be, for example, if it's very early in it, you can do it internally, and you can, because you guys also don't know about what the game is, but because there is still no game or no thing, so that's totally fine. But you sort of make it in such a way that they can experience it. Again, so the way I just explained it with the simple example of the button, you give it to someone and say, this is what I mean. Yeah, press on the button, and then sort of you fake this functionality by flipping over the pages of that paper. Or you make a clickable prototype with something like Adobe XD or Figma or whatever. But the thing is, it needs to be the state of whatever is that you're making needs to be you have to think about it as a minimal viable product, an MVP. It just needs to be just there to convey that big idea that you're having, or the interesting idea that you're having. So it's not about how good it looks, but about whatever. It's about trying to communicate that principle, and you still also frame it as such. And so with the check, and when you're in that phase, you have that product. It's also sort of this. It serves two purposes. One is that it you sort of test out your own assumption, right? You have this. You've made these. You've come up with this good idea, assuming that it is good, a solution to that problem, the design problem that you're having. And secondly, it's also part. It can be part of convincing other people that it is good as well. When you do the check, you always think about, okay, how can I validate the thing that I'm, how can I validate this? So you want to sort of think about, okay, and it can be on different, let's say, qualities, right? So it can be about its functionality, about the fact that it's effective. It can be about how efficient things are, or how pleasurable something is, or satisfying. And then, other things as well, of course. And you come up with something that is actually you can sort of quantify in a way. And it doesn't have to be quite, it doesn't be very scientific. It just needs to be sort of in a way reasonable. And especially in the beginning, it can be anything about something. If someone actually sort of keeps clicking, sort of wants to push on this button, let's say, for example, 3 times, because then he can sort of achieve that goal, because the button has to do with some kind of functionality, makes it. And if 9 out of 10 people do this, then I have validated my assumptions, or my hypothesis. And the hypothesis means that you basically say, I think that my end users, my players, will achieve this goal through using this. That's then an hypothesis, and then you can say, well, you come up with a metric, right? So it's like, okay, if they keep pushing it 3 times, then sort of the end state is reached. And if 9 out of 10 people that does this, then so that those are the criteria, then my hypothesis has been validated. The point is, of course, is that it's not as much as being right as much being wrong. It doesn't matter what the result is. Any result is a good result because you can learn from it. If it's validated, means that you're on the right track, and then means that you have and the test will yield some results that that improves your can improve your design. If it's wrong, it will also yield results, because you can probably see why it went wrong, and then in the next cycle, in the think phase, you can think about, okay, how can we do it? How can we do it differently? And the whole point of going through these cycles is that you're trying to make it as small as possible. The problem that you're facing, the things that you want to sort of solve, as small as possible, and that you can do it in the most, let's say, in as short a time as possible. And so you don't going through these cycles, you don't want to make it too big. You don't want to make a very complex task as well, right? You want to what doesn't fit within this sort of design approach is, yes, we want the game that's too big. It's like we want the game that's really good. That cannot be done in this. It doesn't make any sense to say, well, that to incorporate such a complex thing in using this sort of this process. You have to break it down to very smaller parts and smaller, design problems. Then it makes much more sense. So far, so good. Did you guys understand what this whole Lean UX thing is about? Okay. Do you have any questions about this? do you have a sense of how you could use this in your current, well, way of working? Niels.
Yes.
Until what time do we? Yeah, how much time do I have left?
We should finish within an hour.
Okay. Okay, so I've prepared a little sort of exercise where we can sort of try out this process, but I'm sort of, I think it's going to be a tight fit. That's what I'm sort of afraid of. So maybe it's better to save this for next week, and then we just step into, let's say, the workshop part of this my little mini course. Is that okay?
Yeah, that sounds perfect.
Okay. Okay, so yeah, well, so I to be honest, I was it went quicker than I thought it would. So if it's okay with you guys, I want to sort of practice this process with you next week, because then we have slightly more time, and then I know it will fit better, and hopefully things become slightly more clear and maybe also more applicable for your context. So to prepare for next week, I would like for you to think about, your own design experience again, and sort of yeah, and I would like some more, let's say, stories about how you try to, how you design a game, how you make a game together, and how you have experienced that so far, and yeah, and that you can share that with us. It would be awesome if you could do it, verbally, but it's also good when you can share it on the chat, and but that you can sort of, sort of copy paste it, and then we can sort of discuss it or try to discuss about it. Is that okay? Is that doable? All right. So cool. So before we wrap up then for today, are there any questions that you have, things that you want to know about, more about the design process, about game design, well, about me, about my work, anything? Well, if people are interested, I'm happy to share about this. If you Well, okay, how to construct a business model in a mobile game? Well, funny enough, okay, so let me try to answer that last question first, because I have unfortunately a very short, a relatively short answer for this. It happens to be that I'm looking into this for a client of mine, about the fact about how you can make money with a mobile game. And the problem is that it's very, very difficult, especially on Android, what I've been sort of seeing so far. Especially when you're going for the free to play models, it's super difficult because the most successful games are are being made by huge companies. And the reason for this is that making the game is actually the starting off point for actually making money from the game, because the whole business model is, especially in the free-to-play market, it revolves around the fact that they are trying to get sort of the huge amounts of players, so to get sort of the benefits of the economy of scales, right? So you need millions of players where a small percentage will actually pay money, and then a lot of money for, let's say, your premium offerings. And then keeping that and keeping those players involved and interested over a long period of time, because that's where you also make money in scale. So it's like in time and in numbers, which means that you also need quite a huge a company, a huge team to keep that whole game going, and also a huge marketing budget to make that work. Now, and that's one way to look at it. At least, and this is sort of what I've seen so far relevant for those free-to-play models. But then there are also smaller. There's also another way to go about this. Is that I have been looking into a developer which is called Voodoo, and they make actually basically very simple games with which are relatively easy to make with relatively simple mechanics, and with relatively low maintenance, but just being played quite often. And there are slightly simpler games, so it's like the .io games basically, but has a potential for keeping players hooked, and then push it through ad revenues. So basically, the games are so if you look at any of the Voodoo games, these are super ad heavy, and that's a way. So another way of making games, and which is, I think, relatively, you don't need a lot of people to make it, and it is relatively easy to maintain. But again, here it's the marketing push that makes all the difference. And that's how far I basically got so far with my little research. Yeah, the Android space is super difficult to make some good money off, especially if you're small. I would say that the iOS market is different, because people are well, now with this sort of this let's say Game Pass thing that you can sort of that they're having and they're offering, but also with the fact that people are more willing to pay for a premium game. So the premium model, basically buying your game, spending money, is much more viable there. And you can see that a lot of game developers who actually make, let's say, using this model, don't even bother with an Android version of their mobile game, because it wouldn't make any sense, any business sense in that case. So so there you can if you're sort of a very small operation, you have a game that is actually really, it has potential, or it's a good game, and it makes sense that you sort of more buy it instead of try it and then buy all these really weird, you have all these currency models in there. You're better off focusing then on iOS. And of course, there are all different kind of problems, right? Because you have to go to the certification, and it's quite difficult. And also, now I remember that a friend of mine has has actually made a game for a client, and it's so. I mean, again, making the game is just the beginning. You need to be promoting it quite aggressively, because there are a lot of games out there, and the way you sort of the marketplace is very, very, very chaotic in the terms of that you know being able to be, let's say, findable is a challenge in itself, and therefore you need to sort of be creative about how you promote your game, making sure it's visible to the right people. So being very conscious about your target audience and trying to focus your marketing effort on that is, I think, key into making that game successful. The game it's in itself is never enough, but this actually counts for all games on all platforms, I would say. So so going back to his question, sorry, does this sort of answer that question? Okay. Yeah, okay. So if you want to sort of step into that market and you are a small team, it is always good to find partners, I would say. So there are a lot of, let's say, companies who do marketing or have this sort of platform where they can make things visible, or they have an infrastructure out there that to sort of get that game out there. I definitely would advise to sort of find these people and partner up with them, because they know how to, and they also have a sort of incentive to push that game out there if they feel it's really good. It's also a good test to see if this game is market viable. Maybe sort of offhand observation. You can also see that. Well, let's say, especially on Android, anything goes, right? You don't even need to have a good game, but a good looking game can be more than enough. If you, for example, look at Raid Shadow Legends, which is super heavily promoted on all kinds of social media platforms, but if you really look into the game itself, I mean, it looks the part, right? It looks like a real RPG with with lore and all that kind of stuff, but there is basically no game there. I mean, the game plays, you can actually push a button that says autoplay, which means there's no play at all. You can just, I don't know. It sort of goes beyond an idle game, which means that it is for a lot. And I guess, I don't know, it seems to work. I don't know how it works, but it seems to work. That there are people out there who, for whom it's okay that the game it just pretends to be a game, and that you sort of almost pretend of playing a game. You just click and flip on two things, and you make sort of choices that actually has no meaning, or no actual meaning in the game, but sort of, but for you it has. So like, so the characters, how do you get the characters is by basically opening sort of kind of loot box kind of things, and you get the rares and the mythics and all that kind of stuff, and that is basically the fun part of the game, I would say, because you want to sort of get the cool character or whatever, and then and they focus basically, and but it makes no, let's say, game sense, or has little game impact, because boosted stats, and again, the game plays itself, so there is no really strategy involved. But that it seems to be enough for a lot of players, because they still have a lot, I think, still a huge player base. So in a way, you can also say that there's an opportunity there for, I don't know, things that we don't consider being games or something, and that can be a market viable product. in any case, I found it very, very surprising to see that that actually could exist at all. In any case, so on to the next question, Unexplored 2. So let me, let's see, let me find a trailer for you to play in the background while I'm sort of, well, I guess, sharing my experience with that. This project is, so Unexplored 2 is a sequel to Unexplored 1, which Ludomotion has made, which was a dungeon crawling game, an action dungeon crawling game, or RPG, where with generated dungeons, and one of its main qualities was that the generated dungeons felt like designed dungeons. So they were, everybody, there's sort of this critical, I guess, the feedback, or the thing that people found very cool, was that the dungeons, the challenges felt all handcrafted. Now, Joris Doormans, he basically built it by himself, and has also developed these kinds of, let's say, knowledge and techniques on how to intelligently generate, let's say, level content for games. And he, so he had some very cool techniques to be able to do that. But the thing was that the game didn't sell well because it just looked, well, ugly, basically, or let's say not appealing enough for a broader audience, and decided to, let's say, grow the team and involve me and 2 others in the beginning, to basically up the quality, and he also got some money from a publisher called Big Sugar. And Big Sugar is actually was at that point just starting up, and it was a sort of a spin-off from Digirati, and Digirati was actually basically a porting. They did porting for games, and then sort of published the ports of these games, and they ported for Joris the Unexplored 1 to Switch and other platforms. And from there, sort of this whole they sort of said, well, make Unexplored 2, and we're going to front it with our new publishing company. So let's do it. And this was like 4 years ago. And you have to imagine that we are our team works on this part-time. So I have, well, so I have all kinds of other jobs going on, and I'm doing this for 3 days a week. Others are slightly less, slightly more. And we're a team of, well, I would say quite, let's say, experienced makers, so to speak.
I'm Joris, game director of Unexplored 2, and with me is Matthijs. I'm the.
So I'm going to sort of attempt at streaming this, but that doesn't make actually really any sense. But trying to just show you some, of the things of what the game looks like, if I get it running at all. Probably not. In any case, so I am basically my role in the project is that I am a game designer, and I'm doing part of the process, things of managing the process. I do also part of the financials, and what do I do more? Oh, I do the world building, writing content, that kind of stuff. We have Hendrik Visser, and he is the artist of the game. We have only one artist who has made the whole game. So he does the concept art, but also the in-game assets. So, okay, so I'm much better off just by showing you a picture, I'm guessing. So let me just scale the stream. Oh, maybe I finally managed to, anyways. yeah, this is probably not going to work at all, but it doesn't matter. It's about giving pleasure. And you can find lots of trailers and things on, if you just look for it. The point is that is that we with this small we have okay, so Hendrik, artist, 3D art, and also made all the game assets. Then we have Matthijs, who is basically for the composer, makes audio, the music, and also does a lot of our PR. And then we have also Rosa, who became was first an intern and became a full member of the team later on, and she is a programmer. And then Joris, of course, used the lead of the whole project and also programmer and game designer, etc. And that's the core team. So with this small team, we made this sort of RPG that was going to, is much bigger in scope and scale of an Explored 1. So an Explored 1 was actually a dungeon, was only a dungeon crawler. So you want to go from the top to the bottom and then back again, and that was the game. All kinds of sort of the same sort of scope levels. And in this game, we wanted to up in ambition, and we wanted to make it into something more than just a dungeon crawler. So now it is more of an open world exploration game with all kinds of different locations, open fields, ruins, temples, jungles, deserts. And we added, and it's also about traveling, and there's a small bit of survival in there. And the whole point of the game is to bring this sort of the staff. So you maybe can see it or maybe not, but there you have a sort of a magic staff that needs to be taken to a certain point on the map, where you have to destroy it. It's an evil staff, so and the whole idea is that you have to find a way to that place. And but the thing is that the game world, first of all, you need to find an entrance to that place. You don't know where that is. Maybe there are more entrances. There are you need some keys to open that door, that entrance itself. And maybe it's also too dangerous. So you have to find tools, skill, and you acquire skills to make that run. And the thing is, when you finally get to that let's say the last area of the game, you have only one opportunity to try to reach the end. So you better make sure that you're prepared enough to be able to attempt that final part, that final level. This game has become much more ambitious than we actually should have done. And we've planned to make this game in 2.5 years, maybe 3, but now we're going for 5. So we have been extending. This is our second extension, which is what it needed, but which also has caused problems, and especially in terms of financials and also time. We were spending like 5 years already on the game. It's 5 years of our lives spending making this game, and it's way too long. It's way too long. But then again, and that's something what we hope it's going to be worth it, because it for us it is something, it's something that is special. It also has there are things in there that you don't usually see in these types of games. It is something that we feel is unique, and hopefully other people will see that as well. So in any case, this is sort of let's say the general description of the game and what we've been doing. So if some people have, let's say, good questions about it, let me know. And I'm happy to explain some more about the game. No questions about this? Oh shit. Yes, Linux Pro 2. Yeah, and you can, there's a demo available on Steam tomorrow when the Next Fest is beginning. And then you can see, you can try it out for yourself. We've, yeah, so there's a sort of a limited content demo where you can at least sort of get a good sense of what the game is about. So yeah, I would like to sort of invite for you to play it. And if you have some good feedback on it, I would love to hear that next week from you guys. Just to sort of, as a sort of, if there are no other questions, just a final sort of word on what I guess I find very interesting about this game is that the ambition was, you know, is like, you know, a full RPG that usually is being made by, you know, a mid-sized team, right? 15 to 30 people. But because we could sort of leverage the techniques and technology for the content generation, we could do this with this very small team. And that makes it, on one hand, quite interesting, and also on the other hand, quite challenging as well. Yeah, so if there are no more questions, we can wrap it up for today. Great. Okay. Oh, yes. Yes. Okay. So I'm gonna. So, John Chan, you have questions? You're saying, what kind of question you have? Yeah. Let's see. The thing is with multiplayer games, it comes to is you need to the way it becomes valuable is you know, when the game is being played, right? And it means that you need an active player base to make it work. So making the game is then again sort of the starting point of your whole. It's just a beginning, right? You need to, when you finish the game, you need to sort of cultivate a community of players to make it you know, viable, and then you can make money off of it. The thing is with single player games, you make it and then you sell it, and then you do the patches and all that kind of stuff. But then the game offers a self-contained experience, and you don't need, let's say, the connection of all players to make the game playable. With multiplayer games, and you can see that when you sort of research into let's say the multiplayer games of the past, successful and not so successful, you can see that the key of success and then there's also why you fail is that has to do with things that are happening within your player base, in your community. And then it could be something about not enough maps, server problems, the meta not being good enough, all these kind of things that that sort of make people to go sort of opt out and go somewhere else, and that makes it quite risky and challenging. While the risk of making a single player game is all involved, let's say, in the beginning of the process to a certain extent, Yeah, you sort of like say, well, we're going to make this RPG, and well, so like in our game, and then, well, you sort of get a good sense of how it's going to be played, because you already sort of, you offer this self-contained product. So if you want to make a multiplayer game, you need to understand that you're in for the long haul. You need to figure out, okay, what is that life cycle of my game, my multiplayer game, and how many people do I need to make it viable and profitable? And do we have, let's say, the money, the infrastructure to maintain that and promote it actively? And that makes it a whole different kind of way of approaching this. Yeah. So I would say, especially when you're sort of starting off, I would say no. Not unless you can find a huge investor that actually helps you, make sure that you have staying power. Even if you know what you're doing, right? You have a good idea, you have good tech, and you still need lots of money upfront to make sure that you can actually maintain that game for, I don't know, an X amount of time. So I would say, if you don't have those resources, you can't, if you want to do it sort of with a small team and do it, let's say, lean, I would say go for the simplest model, which is, single player game in a certain kind of niche, and build up your reputation from there and your experience from there. It's also about, if we're talking about making a career, right? About making a career of making games, it's all about, it's not so much about that one product that you're making. It's about how you sort of, it's about how you will be making games for a long time, which means that you need to develop let's say, a network of people that a network of trust, people who trust you to do whatever it is that you're good at, and also learn about how to maintain a healthy and healthy career that actually also grows with you. I mean, you're young now, but that won't be the case after some time. I mean, for example, I'm 40, so which means I've been doing this since I was 26, if I'm not mistaken, and somehow I'm still doing this. And don't ask me how I did this, because I still don't know how I'm able to do this, because I'm not a typical game designer in that sense. I've done all kinds of things with games in all kinds of fields, but I am not a typical game designer. But now I'm doing, after like 12, 13 years of making things that has to do with games, I am now making an indie game. Which is a pretty, well, and a pretty good one, I would say. And it is not how I sort of imagined it. It's not how I would sort of, if I look back, so I say, okay, that's really the way we did it, was not the smartest way to do this. And we're learning about how to communicate with our publisher. We're learning how to promote our game. We also don't really know how to sort of keep in touch with how we sort of should cultivate a player base, but we do it, but we're doing okay enough that we can handle it. So and that's the whole, and that's actually, I think, the whole point, right? Take on what you feel that you can take, that fits you. Don't go overboard. Don't overscale. You have time. You have more than enough time to go for that big thing, that big hit. If you make it too big, the stakes are too high. The burn can be too much. I have seen many people in the past taking too much risk, and then they burned, basically. They stepped out, or they lost a lot. in my time, I have seen many people starting up cool companies with cool ideas, with very, very, very talented people, but they just couldn't make it over time. They had a huge amount of success, and then they burned. They took too many risks. They took on too many things that that didn't fit that level of what they could take on. So being able to pace yourself professionally, right? Being as a developer or a designer, thinking about a healthy career, about, okay, how much stress do I want to take on to me? How difficult do I want to make my life for myself? Those things are the most important things to think about. I mean, you guys can already make stuff. You already have skills, right? That's why that's what your school. Niels told me about how wonderfully talented you are, and over time you will get better, much better. And that's a function of time, spending time working on it, and that is not the biggest thing. It's everything is about how do you go about this, how you will be able to make this a good career out of this, and not burn out, not be miserable. Do what you love is very difficult to maintain. And okay, so I sort of went out on a tangent, so I apologize that it may be slightly off topic. Let's see, what is it? Oh yeah, so to double back on the question, John Chan, take the amount of risk that you feel that you are willing to take and can take, right, in capabilities. And I would say, if you're doing it on your own, do the safest thing that you feel that you have already mastered, and try to make money off that. If and then the other answer is, if you can sort of do the biggest and the riskiest thing, but then at a company, do that, because that's a wonderfully learning experience where you can immediately see if that fits you, and you can also get then the right amount of connections and all that kind of stuff. Hopefully that's a satisfying answer to your question. Okay, cool. Let me just kill this. So, anything else? Okay, so the only thing that I want to ask you is to think about your past design experiences, and just and be able to sort of type that out so that you can paste it in the chat next week, because I want to get a sense of how you experience your own development and design process. And it can be a small anecdote, something about what you found very frustrating, or something that was really wonderful. So a small anecdote. And I want to sort of see, because I have no idea, of course, what kind of school you're at, how your work culture is. And this gives me sort of an insight in how I can, offer you this sort of method the best. And don't forget, it's something about that you are willing to share, of course. Thanks, Niels. Okay. Yeah, I think so too. I think that we're done for today. I really want to thank you for the time and the privilege of actually trying, for being allowed to sort of teach something to you. I hope you find it very useful and at least slightly interesting. And I hope to see you all next week.
Okay, thanks, Karel. And I've already told everyone from Salty Tech High School that I will be on vacation next week. So that means next week on Thursday, Karel will open the Zoom for you all. And Karel, I would just ask you if you could make the, well, I'll make sure that you know by email who to make a co-host so that they can create a local recording in case something happens to the internet connection. Right?
Yes. Okay, that's good. That's cool. Okay, well, thank you, everybody.
I'll see you around.
So Carl, do we meet on Wednesday? Next week, Wednesday?
Thursday. Yeah.
Thursday.
Thursday or Tuesday? No, Thursday?
Thursday.
Yeah. Okay.
So Thursday at the same time.
All right then.
Okay then. Thank you, everybody.
Okay. Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye.